Hello. So it's been a little while since I posted a video here, and I had this great plan that last month, March, I'd actually post a video about the Celtic languages, because the 1st of March is St David's Day, National Day of Wales, 17th of March is St Patrick's Day, National Day of Ireland, so I thought, great, I'll post about the Celtic languages, and then real life and sources of busyness got in the way, and that didn't happen. So I thought I would do a video now about Celtic languages, because honestly, who cares what month I do it in? So this is a topic which is of some personal interest, because I grew up in a region of northwestern Wales where a lot of people still speak Welsh, which is one of the Celtic languages. And I found generally that while lots of people are aware that there are languages we can call Celtic, there's a lot of sort of uncertainty and confusion about these languages, with people often confusing the terms Celtic and Gaelic, not being sure how many languages there are, assuming that no one speaks the Celtic languages anymore, etc., etc. So the idea of this video is to sort of talk a little bit about the basic situation with the Celtic languages, modern and ancient. So there are currently spoken in the world 6 Celtic languages. These are spoken in Britain, Ireland and northern France. And the one in northern France, Breton, was taken over to continental Europe from Britain. So all of these languages are referred to as the insular Celtic languages, so insular as in island, because they come from these islands, Britain and Ireland. And this is in contrast to the continental Celtic languages, which are a group of Celtic languages which were spoken historically on the continent of Europe, not in Britain or Ireland. There are 2 branches of the modern insular Celtic languages. There are the Goidelic languages, and there are the Brythonic or Brittonic languages. So the Goidelic languages include Irish, spoken in Ireland primarily, and that is sometimes known as Gaelic, although that's not so common nowadays. Irish people tend to prefer to refer to the Irish in English. Irish people tend to prefer to refer to the language when they're talking in English as Irish. Irish was brought over to Britain as a language in the medieval period, or possibly actually the late classical period, while Romans were still in Britain, this is the origin of Scottish Gaelic, sometimes known as Scottish Gaelic, but in Scotland people tend to refer to it as Gaelic, which is a bit closer to how the name of the language is pronounced in the language itself. And there's also Manx language, also brought over from Ireland to the Isle of Man. So these are the Goidelic languages, which might sometimes be called the Gaelic languages. And the other branch, the Brythonic languages, these are not Gaelic. The term Gaelic does not apply to the Brythonic branch of Celtic languages. And the Brythonic branch includes Welsh, which is spoken in Wales, Cornish, spoken in Cornwall, and Breton, spoken in Brittany, in northern France. And as I said, Breton was taken over to northern France in the end of the Roman period in Britain as Germanic settlers, Anglo-Saxons and Jutes, were moving in, and their varieties, of course, came to coalesce to form Old English. Now, some people have suggested that perhaps when Breton was taken over to northern France, there might still have been some Gaulish speakers there, and so there might be some Gaulish influence on modern Breton. And Gaulish is one of the continental Celtic languages, along with several others. So St. Paul wrote a letter to the Galatians. They were a group of Celtic speakers in what's now Western Turkey. And so Galatian was another Celtic language closely related to Gaulish. There's also Lapontic, Celtiberian, quite a few continental Celtic languages. And these did not really survive the Roman Empire, essentially. So they died out in the late Romans or early medieval period. There are also some extinct Celtic languages associated with Britain. One of them is Cumbric. So this is a Celtic language closely related to Welsh, so it's a Brythonic language, and that was spoken in northern England and southern Scotland. And they're actually, so the surviving literature, which survives in Welsh manuscripts in Wales, but may well have originally been written in Cumbric, in what we Welsh know as Yr Hen Ogledd, the Old North, meaning northern England, southern Britain. There's also this somewhat mysterious language, or I should say that Cumbric, by the way, died out in some point in probably the relatively early medieval period. There's this other language known as Pictish, which was spoken in Scotland, basically further north. So we have this area, something known as Pictland, which takes up much of sort of north eastern Scotland, standing relatively far west, in fact. And it's really not very clear what kind of language Pictish was, for the simple reason that we don't really have many examples of it. There are these stones in Pictland with some writing on them. It's not entirely clear what this writing says. There have been a few different suggestions. But the place names and personal names associated with Pictland tend to look very much like Brythonic names, typically. So one good possibility, and probably the dominant view, I'd say, among linguists, is that Pictish was probably related to the Brythonic languages, or perhaps a member of the Brythonic subfamily. Perhaps it was, in fact, it was quite relatively likely to have been a variety that was much less Romanized, less influenced by Latin than the Brythonic languages further south. So there's been there's a lot of Latin influence on Welsh, for instance. But we don't know for sure what kind of language Pictish was. The two of the insular Celtic languages have also been referred to historically as extinct. One of these is Cornish, and there's a little bit of a debate over when Cornish, in some sense, died out in terms of native speakers. So the traditional story is that a speaker called Dolly Pentreath died out. Dolly Pentreath died in the late 18th century. And then the idea was that the language was sort of kept alive by second language speakers and enthusiasts for a while before being, relatively successfully revived a bit later. So there's now a community of Cornish speakers, some of whom speak the language to their kids. There are now, native Cornish speakers again. There's some debate, though. I mean, there are some people who say that there are sort of first language speakers even into the 19th century, and that there's a much stronger chain of Cornish speakers than had previously been assumed. There's also a sort of similar discussion around Manx. So there was a kind of a break, if you like, in the 20th century where first it essentially stopped being a sort of first language for a little while. But the last first language speaker of Manx died where Manx, that efforts were already being made to revitalize Manx and to teach it and to support it. So arguably Manx did not die out, and there are quite a few speakers on the Isle of Man now who speak it to their children and so on. Another division between Celtic languages you might have heard of is between Q and P Celtic. So the idea here is that some Celtic languages have a K sound, which corresponds in other Celtic languages to a P sound. And an example of this would be Mac, meaning son, which occurs in Scottish and Irish names like MacDonald. And the corresponding cognate word in Welsh is mab, historically map with a P. And in fact, you get similar kind of name structure historically, and to some extent now in Wales, where people might be known as Dafydd ap Siôn, for instance. So Dafydd, son of Siôn, with the M basically being lost in this construction. But the normal word for son is mab. You also find another example of that would be the word clan, which has been borrowed into English. And this corresponds to the word plant in Welsh, which means children. So you see this k versus p correspondence again. This is actually a borrowing. So the word Welsh word plant and the Goidelic word clan was borrowed ultimately from Latin, from the same origin as the word meaning plant, as in things that grow. You see the connection with children. Now, as these examples might suggest, the Goidelic languages are Q Celtic languages, and the Brittonic languages, like Welsh, are P Celtic languages. So you might think that these are just sort of alternative names for the Goidelic and Brittonic branches. It's a little more complicated than that, though, because Gaulish, for instance, is also a P Celtic language. It also has P's instead of where you see this K sound, or in the Goidelic languages, and Q's in some other languages like Latin. So this actually leads to an interesting question, which has not been fully settled, which is, are the Brythonic languages more closely related to the Goidelic languages? So is it the case that we have an insular Celtic subfamily in the family tree of the Celtic languages, and that this insular Celtic family, including Irish, Manx, Scots Gaelic, Welsh, Breton, Cumbric, Cornish, etc., are these more distantly related to the continental Celtic languages like Gaulish, or do the Brythonic languages and Gaulish form a subfamily, which are then more distantly related to the Goidelic languages? And I'm not going to give you an answer to that today, but this is a source of debate. There are, it's worth saying, really quite a number of similarities between the insular Celtic languages. So I can say, as a Welsh speaker, that it's not the case that if I go and look at some Irish or Scots Gaelic or listen to it, that it's immediately really easy to understand it. It's really hard. It feels like a very, very different language. It takes quite a lot of work to learn it. But, well, these languages take quite a lot to learn them, I should say. But if you start learning the Goidelic languages as a speaker of a Brythonic language, you soon start to see interesting, striking similarities, which make very clear that these are related languages. The other source of confusion that people often have about the Celtic languages, they assume that no one really speaks them anymore. This is not true. There are communities, sometimes thriving communities, of speakers of Celtic languages in different places. But it is true that all of these languages give us cause for concern, and it can be quite hard to identify how many speakers there are. And there are a number of reasons for this. So on the one hand, if you ask people, for instance, do you speak Welsh? They might be very proficient, fluent, native speakers of Welsh. It just happens to be the case they live somewhere where they don't have an opportunity to speak the language. So they don't say that they speak it. Well, I can speak it, but I don't. Or perhaps you ask people, on the other hand, can you speak Welsh? And sometimes you'll find people who speak Welsh extremely well, perhaps natively. But they have this strangely, or perhaps they use the language quite a lot even, but they have this sort of strangely low opinion of their own proficiency, and they don't really think that they're very good speakers in some sense. And this may be familiar to you in your own language, right? Even English, people will often have a very low opinion of their ability to speak their own language. So sometimes you'll find distortions on that side. On the other hand, you'll sometimes find people who will say that they speak a language, but they don't perhaps actually speak it particularly well. Maybe they learned it at school and it's actually extremely rusty, and if you were to try and engage them in conversation in the language, they'd actually find it very hard. So it can be very hard getting a good estimate of speakers of a language. It's fairly clear, however, that by far the healthiest of the Celtic languages is Welsh. And I think it's probably reasonable to say that there are at least several 100,000 pretty proficient speakers of Welsh in Wales. And you have other speakers elsewhere in the world, perhaps most surprisingly in Argentina, because there was a colony of Welsh people who went to Argentina, the Chubut Valley in Patagonia in the 19th century. And you also find other places, like sometimes you'll find Welsh speakers even in places like Philadelphia. Historically true too, there are quite a lot of Welsh place names around the city of Philadelphia, especially in the northwest. Irish too Irish is probably the next healthiest, or very certainly the next healthiest. But it's the difficulty with Irish is that a lot of people will learn the language at school, but it doesn't get used so much after school, except in certain regions of the country. Although for all the Celtic languages, there are some cause for concern, but also occasionally cause for optimism as well. And there are programs to try and encourage people to use these languages. And there's very good reason to have quite serious concern about the future of Scots Gaelic, Breton, but to some extent all those Celtic languages, unfortunately. So that's the sort of, to some extent, pessimistic side. On the optimistic side, there are still thriving communities of people who speak Celtic languages in the world. I speak Welsh every day to my kids, and they understand everything I say. So even in a city like this, where pretty much no one speaks Welsh apart from a few sort of random people like me, it's still possible to use the language. And I'd like to finish by encouraging you, if you speak a Celtic language or any other minoritized language, then please do use it. Please do take every opportunity you have to use it. And if you want to hear me speaking Welsh, there are, in fact, a couple of videos out there online where I use Welsh. One in particular where I talk about my research at Cardiff University, as I taught at Cardiff University. But in case you don't want to hear me talk about my research in Welsh, I'll just give you one last bit of Welsh, which is goodbye. Hwyl fawr.